Hello and welcome to Where You Lead, a podcast where we, a real-life mother and daughter duo, rewatch Gilmore Girls and discuss the misadventures of fictional mother and daughter duo Lorelai and Rory Gilmore. I am Tessa Dare, a writer and the author of the paranormal mystery series The Karanzan Chronicles, and Beth's daughter.
And I'm Beth, Tessa's mom and also a writer. Tess and I have been talking about movies, TV, music, politics, and culture pretty much since she could read. Even after she moved to Seattle, we kept up this dialogue until one day one of us joked we should do a podcast and move these talks into the digital world. The Gilmore Girls seemed like a good place to start because not only does their story resonate with us, I was a single mother of a teenage daughter attending a private school we could not afford, but the plot lines in the show often touch on topics that Tess and I like to discuss. So here we are, recording from our respective studios in separate cities. Tess is in Seattle and I'm in St. Louis.
And we now have a Patreon. If you would like to support us on Patreon, you can find us at patreon.com/whereyoulead, all one word. Every week, we will start off the podcast episode with a synopsis of the television episode, along with the date it aired before heading into our discussion.
Today we are discussing Season 1, Episode 11, Paris is Burning. It originally aired January 11th, 2001.
So a brief synopsis of the episode is basically Paris, recurring character, has become the subject of a lot of bullying at school due to her parents' ongoing nasty and super public divorce. And meanwhile, Lorelai and Max's relationship is kind of moving forward, maybe heating up. I don't know. It's moving forward, definitely. After a series of events, Lorelai gets caught making out with Max Medina by Paris, who immediately spreads the gossip all over school as a way to take the heat off of herself. I guess I should state we are recording this in December. I think we're both a little low energy today. But I think we're ready. Some of us may or may not be battling colds. Some of us just live in an area where sometimes the sun doesn't shine for several days. So
that would be you
that would
living
be
in
me.
Seattle, and I am battling a cold, so I will try not to cough into the microphone. But yeah, so we open the episode. They're walking through the town, so it's a town scene. And they're having a witty conversation that's kind of talking about the ABCs of something, and they have different
It's a game.
letters.
Yeah,
it's a
it's
game.
a game that they're
yeah.
playing where they each name diseases based on like the next letter of the alphabet.
Oh, geez, yeah. I missed that part. I just caught the lettering part. But then they spy a pet adoption event where there are puppies. So they had gotten to pee, and the segue is puppies. So the puppy, what's interesting to me about it is that it's part Cocker Spaniel, part Golden Retriever, part Bouvier de Flanders, and part Rottweiler. That's a really odd combination of dogs. But then they get into, and it's named Buttercup,
Yes, Buttercup.
of all things, which of course made me think of the Lucinda Williams song called Buttercup. You would love that. You should listen to it. Anyway, it's a song about, she says, I'm not going to be your Buttercup anymore.
So it's not a song about a dog.
No, it's not a song about a dog. It's a song about how women are treated like buttercups. So anyway, Rory reminds Lorelai why she cannot have a pet. They had a pet. They had a hamster, a vicious hamster that kept biting her. His name was Skippy.
Yep.
Or her name, we're not sure. So they talk about how bad Skippy was, and it's just a very funny scene.
They also compare the dog to Luke because the dog that they're looking at is scared of blonde women, brunette men, the color red, cabbage, and Lorelai jokes that it's the dog version of Luke.
And the crazy thing is, where do they get all this stuff from? Is this just creative writing on the part of the adopting agency, or and we have a local adoption agency here in St. Louis that writes creative things on Facebook, trying to get people to adopt the cats and dogs that they write about. So some of these adoption people can be pretty creative. So that could be what's going on in this scene. We don't really know, but Luke agrees with Rory that they do not need anything,
Mm-hmm.
much less a dog, which is a lot more work than a hamster. Well, we cut to the next scene.
Yeah, the next scene.
Where she is having dinner at Max's place. Am I right about that? That's the next
Yeah.
scene? Okay. And at the end of the scene, they finally have sex. And I don't know if they've done this before, or because later on in the episode, they talk about how they've been dating for 2 months at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And we've skipped some time in the episode, so we don't know if this is the first time or what. But they definitely have sex, and she comes in late. But what happens? I mean, she comes home late,
Mm-hmm.
and Rory kind of teases her about it. But the story that she tells about what's happening in the scene before they go to the bedroom actually makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, she doesn't eat anything at dinner,
Mm-hmm.
and then when he's putting things away, she takes the pot that the food is in, which is, I guess, also
Ossobuco is what they called it.
yeah, it's a meat thing.
Yeah.
And she's eating it. She asks for the bread so she can dip the sauce. I guess he's cooked it in a sauce. And, he's teasing her, you didn't eat anything at dinner, and you're eating now. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so she asks him where he got the recipe. And this is the best part of the scene to me, because he tells her that it was a little Italian woman who lived upstairs and used to make meals for him and gave him the recipe. And then she said, so it was a former girlfriend, right? Mm-hmm. And that's hilarious. But it reminded me that when I was at college, we actually did have an elderly gentleman, Italian, who lived next door to us, whose wife had died a few years before, and he did in fact cook for us and teach us how to make a few things. So when he's telling the story, I'm like, yeah, she's like Mr. Lacey. And then of course, no, it's a former girlfriend. I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, that was cute.
So then but the best part of the scene is when she picks a Marcel Proust book out of his very ugly bookcase.
Yeah, oh God.
Beautiful books. I mean, they're all leather bound, and they've got gold filigree and stuff on them or whatever. They're beautiful books that he's been collecting, and it's in this metal shelving
the kind of shelving that you
would have in the basement.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
It's like, okay, all right, I guess that's okay.
Yeah, I mean,
anyway.
it felt like a very, like, man in the 90s kind of aesthetic. Like, it sort of looks like something that, like, Fox Mulder would have in his apartment.
Actually, it looks like something that I would have had in my apartment in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. That's how old this is. So, back in my college days, certainly not, as an adult in dating mode, which is what this guy is. So then they talk about Proust versus Michael Crichton.
Yes.
And I'm sitting here thinking, man, give me Michael Crichton any day. I'm sorry. He's one of my favorite writers, always has been. And actually was just thinking about him the other day, and how he would weave his stories in a kind of circular manner, like he was unpeeling a piece of fruit. He'd peel a layer away to give you part of the story, and then there'd be a lot of action, then you'd peel another layer away, and they were somewhat mysteries, but they're always scientific mysteries, and he just gradually, until you get to the center of the story, and that's when everything breaks loose. He had a kind of a Frankenstein approach to everything, because he thought science was only going to destroy us in the end. All of his books are like that. So, but I just love Michael Crichton. So, yeah, I've never read any Proust. Have you ever read Proust?
I don't think so. No. I mean, I remember him getting talked about when I was in high school, but I don't think I ever actually ended up reading anything by him. No.
He gets talked about a lot, and it's like he's an example used in a lot of movies and TV shows about when they want to present somebody who's super or uber intellectual, or over, pseudo intellectual. That's the word I want. Pseudo intellectual. You bring up Marcel Proust, which has always made me think, well, that's probably not somebody I want to read then. So it happened.
Yeah, I feel like he always gets brought up in the same breath as James Joyce. Like, have you read Remembrance of Things Past or Ulysses? Like, those are the two super long books.
Well, here's a funny story about Ulysses, and this is why we do this podcast, because of these stories. But Stephen King, just this past week, tweeted about, and I guess he's still using Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
He tweeted about Ulysses. So he finally got around. He's in his 70s now, right? So finally got around to reading Ulysses, and he says it was okay, but it's really fucking Irish. I did see that. And it's like, oh man, okay, so now I have to read Ulysses.
I've actually heard one of my friends did read Ulysses like a year or so ago, Nate, I believe. I think he did actually finish it.
Really?
And he said that it wasn't as hard as he was expecting.
The thing is, I think the first, I don't know if this is true or not, or it's a bad memory, but it seems like I tried to read it. I think I own a copy somewhere. And the first sentence, there's one line is the first sentence, and the second sentence is like 16 pages long. I mean, he's like, Faulkner in that regard. He has these long,
well, and that's the ongoing
sentences.
joke in the episode, right? Is that as Lorelai returns to talking about Proust, she makes a joke about how the first sentence is 20
First
pages
sentence
long.
was 20 pages long. Yeah. So apparently Proust is like Joyce.
Yeah. So Lorelai does attempt to sneak home at 1 a.m., but Rory catches her, and Lorelai tells Rory that Max lent her a book, and Rory says, "You know what it means when a man loans you a book, don't you?" And Lorelai replies that he's already read it, and Rory just says, "Yep,
yeah,
that's what it means."
That's what it means. And the fact that she is still up, Rory is still up, is the roles are reversed here. She's being the mom, checking in on her somewhat daughter, and it's not just here, but it happens at the end of the episode too. The roles are definitely reversing here, and she stays up to what she's waiting up for her mom, and she tells her, "You look really happy."
Yeah.
And she admits, I am happy. So at this point, this relationship is working for them, which is interesting because the teacher, and we should talk a little bit about this. Max Medina is her Rory's lit teacher, and he is her mother's boyfriend, and that's how they met at the school. And he is kind of an intellectual guy. I mean, he's talking about he loans her the Proust book. He's talking about Emily Dickinson at Parents' Day later on, and talking about he recites from memory an Emily Dickinson poem. It's quite lovely. I've never really been able to get into Emily Dickinson, but what he recites is pretty good. Anyway, he's a smart guy. He's got a brain. And I'm not saying that Lorelai is not a smart woman. She's very smart. She's never been an academic person, though, and it's interesting that they are working out so well together up to this point. So, but yeah, he talks about Emily Dickinson later on being a passionate recluse.
Yeah, so that's kind of not true. I did want to.
No, she wasn't.
I did want to talk about this. Yeah. This is during the period of time, and so that's actually the next scene.
Yeah, it is the next scene.
I did.
There's interesting stuff in the next scene too.
Yeah. Before we move on to that, I'm just gonna briefly mention that there's a line about how Dean had to call 5 times that night. This is also kind of an ongoing joke that, like, I get what they're going for, but every time they make this joke, it weirds me out a little. I do remember what it was like to be a teenager in this time, and typically what would happen is my friends and I would talk on the phone for like multiple hours. We wouldn't be like hanging up and calling back. Like, we didn't call each other like 5 times a night unless we were getting disconnected for some reason. So,
and not only that, but when have you ever known a boy to call 5 times?
I mean, I didn't really date boys at that age, so I have no idea what they were like.
Yeah, well, I did, and they don't do that. And I think they still don't do that. So I don't think, men have changed all that much. So it's a little unrealistic.
I don't think
that he keeps calling her.
Yeah, I don't think kids use the phone the same way anymore. I don't think they're calling each other at all. I think they're texting.
Well, but in 2001.
Yeah, at that time, yeah. But yeah, so just that's a weird line. They make that kind of joke a couple of times about how many times a man has to call, and it's just very strange to me. That doesn't seem realistic, and I feel like,
I mean, if he's gonna call that many times, why doesn't he just come over?
Yeah, or like, why don't they just stop hanging up? Like, if they're not done, if they're not done talking.
Oh, I thought of something else I wanted to say.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm calling back 20 minutes later.
But yeah, anyway, so on to the next scene where Max Medina is telling the class about Emily Dickinson. So, like, my understanding is that it's a little bit hard to know for sure exactly what her life is like, but there was this sort of, and I'm not sure how much of this was an actual academic myth or how much of it was just like a pop culture myth. There was this myth for a while that Emily Dickinson was a recluse, but in recent years, that idea has been challenged. There's actually like a fair amount of evidence that she was a pretty social person, and at the very least that she did have friends. But because she was unmarried when she died, people just assumed that meant she was a recluse.
Yes, that's a very important point to make, actually.
Yeah.
A lot of, yeah, women in that era, a lot of assumptions were made about old maids that probably
Exactly.
shouldn't have been made.
Yeah. So I don't know what the exact academia is on this, what the research is on this, but I just know that I've read some articles in recent years about how like it's kind of a myth that she was a recluse. She was actually like pretty well known in her social circles. She just like didn't get married, and yeah, at that time if
Mm.
you didn't get married, and she didn't get married,
People
and
talked about you.
yeah, and like I think they did find a bunch of her poetry in her house. So like a lot of her poetry wasn't necessarily published in like big journals, but that also doesn't make her a recluse. That just means that she was a woman who
No.
tried to publish under her own name and probably didn't get very
Yeah.
far.
So that's an assumption that people have made about her.
Mm-hmm.
But the girls, as they're leaving the classroom, make another assumption and say the
Yes.
dumb girls crave smart men.
Mm-hmm.
Look at Marilyn Monroe. Okay, so first of all, dumb girls. How many girls do you know who are dumb? That dumb.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily crave smart men. That's just there are so many things wrong with that statement. But then to make the assumption that Marilyn Monroe was a dumb girl
Yeah.
is another assumption that bothers me. So
Yeah, and it's also it kind of this exchange further bothers me because I feel like the meta narrative that's going on is that Louise is implying that Madeline is dumb because Madeline's the one who starts off by saying
hmm.
that she has a crush on the teacher.
Oh, that's a good
And then
point.
Louise responds that the teacher probably has a dumb girlfriend because dumb girls are attracted to smart men. And there's kind of an ongoing joke about Madeline that she's a little bit of an airhead. So I feel
Yeah.
like there's a double thing going on there where, yeah, like, first of all, it is a myth that Marilyn Monroe was stupid. She was not.
Mm.
She was pretty smart and very good at crafting her own image, and even the characters she played are not as dumb as people think. The characters that she played were usually themselves putting on a bit of an act.
She was actually a very interesting woman.
Mm-hmm.
She did make it big because of her looks, but that always bothered
Mm-hmm.
her, from what I understand. So she took acting classes so she could get better at her craft, and she did get better at it. You know, some of her later roles were she was a really gifted actress. So I have a lot of respect for Marilyn Monroe, and it's always bothered me that people make these assessments and
Yeah.
assumptions about her. And you know, she suffered from depression,
Yeah.
and she was lonely because she was so beautiful and so famous. People could she couldn't let people get close to her, and she was
Yeah.
lonely,
She
suffered from
also
depression,
She
and
also, like, there are a couple of quotes from her where she's speaking very kind of detachedly about the image of Marilyn Monroe as if that's like separate from herself. You know, this was a whole
hmm.
image that was crafted around her, partly by her, but also partly by studios. You know, there's
Yeah.
kind of a whole apparatus that goes into turning a woman into a sexual object.
And actually, there's a famous portrait of her, photographic portrait of her, where she is in like a halter top and blue jeans, laying on a weight bench, lifting weights. And yeah, it's a great photo and not an image that you would think of, you know, with Marilyn Monroe. In the 50s, women didn't work out. They didn't, you know, most people didn't work out, but certainly not women. And she did. And she, you know, she wanted to be stronger. I don't know if it was for a specific role or what she was doing, but it is a wonderful photo of her because it cuts through the image
Yeah.
that people have of her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, but these friends,
Yeah, Madeline
what are
and
what are
Louise.
the friends' names? Yeah, they say hi to Rory on their way out of the classroom,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of startles her a little
Yeah.
bit. So she's starting to make inroads
Well,
into.
also, they say hi to her, but it's sort of like sandwiched between, like, I think Paris briefly addresses them. So we hear some background stuff about people gossiping about Paris, and then Paris kind of like exits the scene, and Louise and Madeline say hi to Rory, and then immediately start not exactly bad mouthing Paris, but they start gossiping about
Gossiping.
her parents'
Yeah.
divorce, including this very weird line where one of them says something like, "Is it true that her mother's back has been completely surgically
That's
reconstructed?"
weird.
Yeah, which, like, if you listen to that line, it sounds like that means that she was in like a car accident or something. Like, why else would
Yeah.
you need your back to be reconstructed? But then
And then at the back, go ahead.
but then Louisa's response is this kind of bitchy retort of like, well, it doesn't match the front now, does it? Which I'm just like, what?
What does that even
What are you
mean?
guys talking about? Yeah.
They're both idiots. I mean,
it's just it's just this very bizarre moment where they're clearly supposed to be having like a gossipy thing about Paris's mother's plastic surgery, I guess, but I've just never heard of, especially in this point in time, the idea of having your whole back surgically reconstructed for any reason other than you were in a horrifying accident and you needed it to be put back together. But they're acting like it's plastic surgery. I don't know. Maybe she was just
they're not the smartest girls on the planet. Let's just say that. At least they're presented that way.
They are written as foils basically for Rory and Paris, who are who are indicated by the show to be the smart girls, and Louise and Madeline are regularly implied to be not as smart and not as intellectually interested. But the whole scene is strange. You can tell that Rory is weirded out that they've talked to her, but you can also tell that Rory is not like enjoying the fact that people are talking about Paris in this way. It's just like a very weird moment for Rory. And for me, hearing about the back reconstruction. But so then we get to another Friday night dinner.
And again, the timeline here in this episode is completely off.
It's wild.
We're not, I decided at some point to just give up. I cannot keep track of what day it is because they have mushed everything together so much that it just doesn't make sense. So they're at dinner, and the first thing that the knowing smile on Emily's face has gotten her daughter Lorelai's attention, and she keeps asking her, "What's up, Mom? What do you know? What are you thinking? What are you smirking at?" She doesn't say that, but that's basically what Emily's doing, is smirking. And as a way to divert attention from what she knows, she asks them, "So how's the squab?" I had to look up squab.
Squab.
It's an immature domestic pigeon, and it tastes like dark meat chicken. Yes, so it's like I had never, in my 64 years, had never heard of a squab before in my life. I don't know.
They're eating pigeon. Okay.
They're eating pigeon. Yeah.
All right.
So in this scene, and I don't often comment on their clothes. Well, maybe we do, but not in this way. Lorelai has this wonderful sweater on.
The polka dots.
It's polka dots, but it's beautiful. Probably cashmere because it's got a real nice texture to it as well. But it's like a light lavender with these beautiful polka dots. And I was just mesmerized by it. I guess I love polka dots. But it was just beautiful. And actually all three of them I noticed after I noticed her sweater. They're all three wearing sweaters.
Yes.
And I don't usually comment on the clothes, but I just had to point that out. Yeah. Beautiful sweater. Anyway. But Lorelai knows her mom is about to spring something on her. She can just tell by the way she's smiling. It's a smirky kind of smile. And of course she does, because then at some point she says, "Okay, so are you looking forward to Parents' Day?" or something like that. So she knows about Parents' Day because, of course, Emily reads the school newsletter that comes out on Fridays, and Lorelai still has not figured out that she needs to read that damn newsletter before she goes to her mother's house for dinner.
The second it comes out. Yeah, so it sounds like
it comes out,
the newsletter arrives in people's mailboxes or whatever on Fridays. So Emily has...
So you think it's a printed one, it's not coming by email. It's 2001, so it probably is not coming by email.
I would assume that. I'm just assuming based on the time period and the fact that no one has said that it's coming by email. Yeah. I'm assuming.
Yeah, you're probably right.
But so it's, the implication seems to be that it comes out on Fridays, because this is like the second time that Emily has read it before Lorelai, and each time Lorelai insists that it just came out. And this is also kind of the first very weird thing about the timeline, because the newsletter came out Friday, and it says that Parents' Day is the following Wednesday. Which is just insane. Like, they're expecting parents, because Parents' Day is the day where the parents come into school and go through the whole school day with their kids. Or at least that's the implication.
They take the day off.
With basically 2 business days' notice, they're supposed to take the day off.
I think, however, that there's probably a school calendar somewhere that has it on there. That's my impression, is that, I mean, your school had a calendar.
Yeah, but they do not act like Chilton has a calendar. The implication in this scene is definitely that, like, this was the first notification of it, and that's how Emily is able to hold it over Lorelai's head. Because if they had a calendar, then Lorelai would have known about this earlier.
No, she wouldn't have.
I mean, she could have.
She could have.
They are both very much acting like this is the first indication that Chilton has given them of this. Yeah. And yet we're supposed to believe that all of these parents are going to be able to take the day off on Wednesday when they have almost no notice to do so. There are definitely some people who would be allowed to do that in their jobs, but there are many other people who absolutely would not be allowed to take the day off.
And also it's a wealthy parent culture, so there could be a lot of mothers who don't work. And Emily immediately suggests, when Lorelai says she's not going, Emily immediately suggests she can go, and of course we knew that this is where this was heading.
Yeah.
And then Lorelai says, no, I can do it. I can get there. Then she says, well, then there's some mother-daughter talent show coming up too.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I feel like part of my point is that, I don't know how much this is intentional, but this idea feels like a relic of an older time when, like, women would not be expected to work. And maybe that was still true at this time. I feel like nowadays, even in wealthy families, it's somewhat unusual for women to not work.
Yeah. Well, and by the time you guys were in school, when they had parent day type activities, they didn't have it during the course of the day. They'd have breakfast with mom or breakfast with dad before the school day started. And parent teacher conferences were after school. They weren't during the school day because the teachers have to be there for that too, and they're teaching. Or unless, there was a half a day, they do a half a day where you got let out of school early, and then the parents who didn't have to work could come in during that time. But they scheduled things for parent involvement outside of the workday, because even by the mid 2000s, the 2000 aughts, women were working for the most part. I mean, there were a few women who were stay-at-home moms, but increasingly fewer as the years went by.
Yeah, for sure. The breakfast thing, I don't think that I ever did that. That might have been Simon.
Grade school for Simon, yeah. I just remember there being donuts.
And
they only did it for dads. I just remember thinking, the moms do all the work, and you have these breakfasts every year for dads. Really?
Weird. Yeah, that's weird.
It would seem very unfair to me.
Yeah.
And they also, what they finally did was, because there were a couple times when your father refused to go, so I went.
Yeah.
And they finally got to the point where they call it Dad's Breakfast, but they'd invite mothers and grandfathers and special people in your life.
Yeah.
And they would say men sometimes, but then they'd say, mothers can come too. I don't know if they ever changed it to Parents' Breakfast or if it was always Dad's.
That's so weird.
But I never liked how they organized.
Yeah, I hate that. That sucks.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was mom and dad both, so it was not fair to me, I thought. So, but water under the bridge.
Yeah. Anyway.
But before we go on, when Emily mentions the mother-daughter talent show, Lorelai immediately snorts.
Yeah.
And it was the funniest thing. It's like, what talent? It was pretty good.
But yeah, okay, so then the next scene is Lorelai getting ready for a date with Max, and the implication of this scene is that Rory is trying to get out of the house so that she can avoid actually interacting with Max when he shows up. But Lorelai, as per usual, is not ready on time and is kind of having
scatterbrained.
Yeah, having an ongoing meltdown.
Anything.
Yeah, which also just the literal thing that happens in this scene is that she asks Rory where her orange suede hair clip thingy is, and Rory helps her find it, and then you literally see Lorelai toss it aside again and not wear it.
Rory suggests 4 different places for her to look. And it's like, who's the mother here? Again, so there's another role reversal thing. This is the second example of this, and there's going to be another one. But, she says, check here, check there, check your sock drawer.
Yep.
And that's where she finds it.
Is.
Who puts their hair thingy, their orange suede hair thingy, in their sock drawer? I don't get that.
I mean, the same person who, as soon as she finds it, just tosses it aside again.
That's
this thing that she's been looking for this whole scene.
And she's really dressed interestingly, too, because I can't decide if that top... It looks like she's got a slip on that is going to be... And then she's got a shirt over the slip. Is she going to button that up? Or is she just going to go like that? Could you figure that out? It's a very sexy outfit, and I
don't actually remember what she was wearing.
Well, it was 3 different colors, too. The whole thing was just kind of sloppily pulled together, and yes, she looked adorable. But what we find out in this scene is that they have a handbook.
Yes.
Well, that's what they say. I don't know if it's a real handbook or if it's just exists in the cloud that is Lorelai's brain. because at this point there's no real cloud. They have a handbook with rules about when men come to the door.
Yes.
And how she doesn't want Rory answering the door because she doesn't want her to interact with the men in her life. She doesn't want them to have a relationship because she assumes the relationships are never going to work out, and she doesn't want her to be crushed. Mm-hmm. This is the theme of the kind of an underlying theme for this whole episode. When in fact, it's not that she's worried about her daughter getting crushed. She's worried about herself getting crushed because she's had so many disappointing relationships. So she kind of uses the idea that she doesn't want her daughter to get attached when really it's she who does not want to get attached. And that is certainly understandable for someone who has lived the life she's lived.
But yeah, so because Lorelai needs so many different things from Rory, Rory does not end up leaving before Max arrives and does
though there is another door.
Yeah.
She could have.
She could have.
There was another door she could have exited through.
I think part of what's happening is that Lorelai is not actually ready to answer the door, so she needs Rory to answer it.
Yes, that's exactly it.
But then Rory and Max have this very awkward interaction where Rory is clearly kind of trying to like leave and Max kind of keeps engaging her, and she calls him Mr. Medina, and he is kind of put off by that and suggests that maybe she should call him something more informal outside of school.
Well, he says, call me Max.
Yeah.
And the thing is, he once again is not thinking it through.
Yeah.
He didn't think it through when he asked Lorelai out the first time. This is a frequent thing throughout the episode, and he does finally admit it at the end of the episode. He hasn't thought it through. Yep. And without even thinking about it, he tells his student why don't you call me Max? Most schools have a much more formal relationship between the teachers and the students, and so when you went to TJ, that was not allowed. Yeah. You called everybody Mr., Mrs., Miss, whatever. It's a much more formal relationship, and they have that kind of formal relationship between the teachers and students at Chilton, and Max should know that. Yeah. But he doesn't think it through. He's kind of like Lorelai in that respect. She also sometimes doesn't think things through.
And he's thinking about it from a very, not exactly selfish standpoint, but he's not really thinking about it from Rory's point of view. He's thinking about it from his own point of view, where it's like weird for him to show up to a date and have someone call him Mr. Medina. But from Rory's point of view, it's much weirder to try to start to blur that line, because what if she accidentally calls him Max at school?
Right.
That would be embarrassing for her and inappropriate.
Yeah. And I think he kind of feels a little guilty. I mean, he's kind of putting this off on her. You should call me Max so I don't feel guilty about dating your mother. That's kind of the impression I'm getting. What is his real motivation here? When she calls him Mr. Medina, he remembers he's her teacher. So he doesn't want to remember that. He wants you to be, but then, then he makes this suggestion, well, when we're not at school, we can have these private names
fake
for each other. She comes up with Norman. And so that might be a little bit easier. But even so, we're trying to keep this straight for a high school student. If she got into the habit of calling him Max or Norman or whatever, Alfred, and then she blurts that out at school when she's not thinking about it on a morning when she might be tired, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And it's like through the course of this conversation, he never figures that out. Yeah. He never sees what kind of a situation he could be creating for Rory, and it does become a problem later in the episode. Yeah. Exactly this is foreshadowing. He's creating a situation that's going to be a problem for her.
It feels like, so we kind of moved past their date earlier before I remembered to point this out, but when Lorelai and Max are on their date in the early part of this episode, Lorelai immediately proves how inappropriate their relationship is by openly trying to influence Rory's grade on her most recent paper. And Max does make a joke about how it would be unfair to the other kids whose mothers aren't there tonight. But it was just we're playing this for laughs, but it's wildly inappropriate, and she shouldn't even really joke about it. And the show is playing it for a laugh, but it doesn't entirely feel like she's joking, because she sort of keeps pushing it, and it's just that's not even an appropriate joke. Rory is already in a place in this school where people act like she's not good enough to be here. Joking about influencing her grade is super not acceptable. And similarly in this scene, Max asking Rory to call him Max instead of Mr. Medina is just not something that he has a right to do, and it's not something that he should do as her teacher.
He's put her in a very difficult position. She makes the most of it. She turns it around. She doesn't hold it against him. But the whole situation, and we have talked about this the first time they met, and how he kept pushing her to go out with him. This would be Lorelai, not Rory, on how inappropriate it was, or not inappropriate, but it just creates the potential for problems.
Yeah.
And here we are. And the first problem is when she, like you said, Lorelai jokingly brings up the paper. Hey, let's put her paper on the top, and you can just give her an A while I'm here. And then Rory has a problem, with the interaction, and then there'll be a much bigger problem later on in the episode. Yeah. But it's not an easy situation, and that is becoming more obvious by the minute.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so the next scene is between
stuffed squash blossoms.
Sookie and Jackson. Yes, the stuffed squash blossoms, which I did have to look up. That is a real thing. And it looks, they show a squash blossom later in the episode.
Just like squab. It's an unusual thing.
It's a weird thing. But yeah, so they're kind of having a back and forth argument because Jackson doesn't want to give her the squash blossoms and wants her to instead try what they refer to as a zucchini tush, I think.
That he had apparently developed himself by hybridizing something.
Yeah.
But I think what's going on here too is they're setting it up. When they're being contentious with each other, which is often how they are. And in this scene, neither one of them smiles. They are very frustrated. They both have they're in the middle of a disagreement, and they have their sides, and they're not coming together. When it happens again later on, it's a completely different situation. So this is setting that later scene up, I think. Although I had to wonder, that blossom that's on the squash, you really going to stuff that with something? I guess it would be like lettuce.
There are recipes online. Actually, the one that I found online was you stuff it with ricotta, apparently.
Huh. Well,
I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't actually try it, so I have no idea how that would turn out, but yeah.
But the writing in this scene is very good.
Yeah.
He keeps coming up with all these great reasons, why... why she can't do it. It's pretty funny. It's actually a really well done scene, and it's only about a minute long.
And then Lorelai shows up with her skates, and she and Rory apparently have a date to go skating together, and they sort of joke.
Oh yeah, this is happening in Luke's diner, by the way.
Yeah, this is happening in Luke's
diner when this is happening.
Yeah, and they sort of joke that they're going to play act as Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding, which I thought was
not funny at all.
It's not funny, but it is interesting because Rory's going to be Nancy Kerrigan and Lorelai's going to be Tanya Harding, and as soon as they said that, I was like, oh, that's like a perfect metaphor for how Lorelai's parents see them both. Lorelai can do nothing right, and Rory can do nothing wrong. Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, Lorelai holds up her skates. If you have skates that look like that, please do not go skating in them. That would be very dangerous, and you would fall on your face if the skates didn't fall apart under your feet. Fortunately for her, Luke shows up, sees the hazard that she's about to walk into, and decides to fix her skates for her, because of course he can do that. And of course he will just immediately offer to put in a fair amount of work into fixing up Lorelai's old-ass skates.
Well, and before he does that, though, he sees the skates and laughs. And it made me realize, we don't see Luke laugh very often.
Yeah.
So when he looks at those, he really has a hearty laugh at her expense. But then he does offer to sharpen the blades and make sure they're secure. So
and Sookie's exact comment after he offers that is, "You get really good service here."
I missed that one. That's good.
But yeah. And an important thing happens in this scene that kind of sets off the plot of the rest of the episode, which is Rory suggests that they invite Mr. Medina to go skating with them. Yeah.
But she calls him Max.
She calls him Max. And Lorelai pretty much immediately starts freaking out, and that freak out follows us through the rest of the episode.
Yeah, and at first it's just that she called him Max, because she's calling by his first name. But then having an activity or an experience where all three of them are together, not in the school setting.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is a setup for the rest of the episode. I mean, we've been setting up for the rest of the episode.
The whole time.
All the way along, but yeah.
And so the next scene after that is Lorelai and Sookie. And I'll just come out and say it. I feel like this episode marks the beginning of Lorelai's terrible behavior for the rest of this episode. They're having a back and forth where Lorelai is suddenly no longer excited about Max and keeps talking in this way that's like distancing herself from him, like he's a great guy for somebody else. he'll find someone someday, like that kind of language. And Sookie pretty much immediately picks up on it and
It's a pattern.
and straightforwardly tells her this is a pattern. Every time you get to the 2-month point in a relationship, you start doing a quote-unquote cha-cha dance to get away from it, suggesting that Lorelai has done this repeatedly before. Lorelai denies that it's a pattern, but Sookie doubles down and is like, nope, this is you doing the dance. And then Lorelai's response to that is pretty harsh. She replies, "When did you become the relationship expert? You haven't been in a relationship in years."
It was a really cruel thing to say. And TNT realizes it and says, yeah, boy, 0 to jackass in 3.2 seconds. And yet, it's both terrible and kind of good. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say to your friend. And she realizes that, I mean, as soon as she says it, you can just see Lorelai's face. Her eyes just get wider, and she realizes what she said, and she feels horrible almost immediately as soon as she says it. And then you see Sookie's face.
Yeah.
And Sookie is a little bit hurt, but I think she also realizes something in that moment, that she is alone. And she has been alone for too long, and there's somebody in her life that would be a good person for her to be in a relationship with. I think there's all that going on in her face.
I'm not convinced that is what is happening in her face in that moment. I think that's what happens for her after that moment. In that moment, I think she just looks devastated. Her face just like totally falls.
Not for very long though.
She after a moment she does like start to look happier, which I also have kind of an issue with. But in that moment, it is total devastation on her face.
But it's not because her friend has hurt her feelings. It's because it's the truth.
I mean, I think it could be.
Been in a relationship.
I think it could be both.
It's both. You're right.
I also I don't really like how the rest of it plays out because she does kind of immediately turn around. I don't know. It's just like the whole scene kind of struck me as a bit weird because Lorelai does immediately apologize, but she apologizes in a way that focuses on her need for Sookie to forgive her and not so much on Sookie's actual feelings. And Sookie kind of turns around and plays right into that, and Lorelai basically is just like, you can sing Ricky Martin songs at me. And so Sookie jumps on that and sings Ricky Martin songs at her, and so they move past the moment. I understand why they did that because it's kind of a lighthearted show. They don't want to linger on something that's kind of dark for too long. But I also feel like I don't think that that's how it would have really played out for most people.
Actually, I think it is. I think it is because I think
it might play out that way for someone who is super a people pleaser, and that is what it feels like Sookie is a lot of the time.
Sookie is. Yeah. But also when you have a good friend and you say something mean and cutting like that, you do want it to get better immediately. So I think her attempt to smooth things out with Sookie, and Sookie's playing into it and saying, yeah, let's work through this, is realistic because people tend to not like conflict. Instead of talking through this and saying, well, Lorelai, sometimes you're insensitive, or, talking about why maybe Sookie hasn't had a relationship in a long time, instead of getting into that, women, and maybe everybody, but women in particular, I think, tend to shy away from conflict. So that's a very realistic thing happening there. But it also, I think this is the beginning of when Sookie starts to think, it hits her that she hasn't had a relationship in a long time. So, and we'll get to that later. But so there's a lot going on in this scene, and it's a very quick scene. And also she's pouring hot water into the bowl where Lorelai's feet are, from a tea kettle. And she starts to pour this water from the tea kettle. I'm thinking, oh, this is accident-prone Sookie pouring hot water into a bowl where Lorelai's feet are, and they, and it comes up. It's okay. She doesn't burn her, but that's my immediate thought when I saw her doing that. She's going to kill this woman.
Yeah. And so I think, I do think that there are some people for whom, this is exactly how they would respond to that. But I think in the real world, if you experience someone saying something pretty cruel to you that kind of cuts you to the core, and then you just sort of let the conversation move on, that doesn't mean that you get over it. In fact, what that most likely means is you're going to hold on to that resentment. So I do think it's unrealistic to have them immediately move on, and not even unrealistic. It's just like it's a very like centering Lorelai in this moment instead of centering Sookie, where like Sookie doesn't really need any on-screen time to finish processing Lorelai's willingness to say something like that to her, and instead, like the next scene we get with Sookie is it's all been resolved off screen, and in fact it was a good moment for her, and so she's like pushing on. I mean, we've seen the episode, so later on she asks Jackson out. Like that's basically what happens.
Yeah.
Because of
well,
this
here's the
scene.
question though: was it really that terrible a thing for her to have said? I think that when Lorelai says this, you haven't been in a relationship in a very long time. She's pushing back because she doesn't want to hear what Sookie has to tell her. You know, it is a pattern. Mm-hmm. She does break relationships off at the 2-month point, and she doesn't want to hear that. So the first thing she thinks is a pushback with this statement, but it's actually a truthful statement.
But it being true doesn't mean that it's not cruel. And
no,
like,
I'm not
Lorelai...
saying it's not. It's a pushback. It's a cruel pushback, and she's trying to get Sookie to shut up.
Yes.
So she says the first thing that comes to mind, which was thoughtless and bordering on cruel, but at the same time, it's also truthful. And Lorelai does it to get her to shut up, basically. She doesn't want to keep hearing this from her, so she says something that comes out quickly, thoughtlessly, but it's still true. And it does get Sookie. There's not any justification for this statement at all, but the result is that it does get Sookie to think about it. Is she at a point with Jackson that they could have a relationship? Is she at a point in her life? I think it does make her think about it. And my thinking is that maybe they filmed a little bit more and had to cut it out because this episode was too long.
Hard to say.
Because you're right. When it happens later on, it feels like, boy, she resolved that pretty easily. Too easily.
I mean, I almost feel like this argument is basically the writer's like shortcut into jumpstarting the Sookie and Jackson relationship, because I do feel like they've been building that flirtation for a while. But for whatever reason, both Sookie and Jackson, like, neither of them has pushed forward to the next level. So I feel like this scene could be written the way that it is because the writers literally just wanted to give one of them a reason to jumpstart the relationship. I do like that it's Sookie that takes the initiative in their relationship.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty cool and relatively unusual in the world of television in particular. It's usually the guy. Especially when the female character is someone like Sookie, who I think is characterized as being a bit of a people pleaser and maybe not necessarily that good at standing up for herself. So like I do like all of that. I just feel like we're getting very close to a ends justify the means kind of argument, and like I think it's really shitty that Lorelai said that to her, especially if it's true, because you can tell that Lorelai knows that maybe this is something that Sookie is a little bit sensitive about. And also because the argument is wrong. Sookie is not giving her bad advice, and like romantic this is a trope that a lot of people believe that I don't. Romantic relationships are not inherently completely different dynamics to friendships. If you are able to navigate any kind of relationship, you are able to navigate a romantic relationship. There is not some fundamental difference between romantic relationships and like platonic or familial relationships. Conflict is conflict, and like avoidance is avoidance, and Sookie is aware of that. And in fact, Sookie has given her tons of good advice before. It's not always perfect advice, but she is a good sounding board for Lorelai, and Lorelai knows that. So like what she is saying is, since you aren't dating anyone, you don't have any ground to stand on to give me advice, and that's just incorrect.
It is incorrect. Sookie is really good at giving advice. So why is she so bad at giving it to herself? That's another question I had. She does see the patterns in Lorelai's romantic relationships, and yet she hasn't been able to figure out, until that moment anyway, that she and Jackson have a contentious relationship, which is a trope based on attraction. And it is a trope. And it's funny because I think it's not as much of a trope anymore as it used to be. You know, it was, maybe it got overused, but it used to be, you know, I'm thinking about the movies that I've seen of women in the 40s.
I think two things have gone into, I agree it's less of a trope than it used to be, and I think there are two main reasons for that. One, I think, is kind of an increasing sensitivity to a more feminist dynamic between romantic partners, because I do think a lot of those dynamics, not all of them, but a lot of those dynamics lend themselves to somewhat non-consensual scenes. You know, a lot of those dynamics often build to a sort of man takes the woman by force in some way. The other side is just rom-coms are not as popular or as common as they used to be.
No, that's true too. And I'm thinking about Man and Superman, the play, the George Bernard Shaw play, and you read that, right?
No.
Well, Pygmalion.
I've read Pygmalion, yeah.
And Man and Superman, the two romantic partners, the man and the woman, battle a lot. There's a lot of contentious battles between them, and George Bernard Shaw's attitude was that's the best way, because they're both fighting for themselves to be together but be themselves. So, and that's the way, the way you keep your identity in a relationship is to fight for it. I mean, that's a very limited I mean, it's a very simplistic explanation of the play, but that's one of the elements. And I think there's something to be said for that, but at the same time, you also want harmony in a relationship. So Jackson and her arguing nonstop. And I can't remember, after they get together, does it keep up? You don't have to answer that because it's a spoiler, but that's something to talk about later on.
Yeah, I don't remember. We can talk about
it
as it comes up.
So then we get back to school.
Yes.
Go back to Chilton.
Ugh, God, this is another scene that like points out the kind of oddness of the timeline here. So Max pulls Rory back after class to tell her that he hasn't heard from Lorelai in a while, quote unquote, in a while, and he's like getting worried. Except per the timeline that we have seen, they had a date on Saturday, and this is at the latest Tuesday.
Wednesday.
No.
It's the day before
Tuesday.
Parents' Day.
Yeah, it's the day before Parents' Day.
It's Tuesday. Okay.
Yeah, so it's either Monday or Tuesday. So it's been...
So he's as bad as Dean. He's called her 4 times.
Yeah, and so we eventually get that he's called her and left her 4 messages. But yeah, it's just like, I don't know, it's just the way that he says, like, I haven't heard from her in a while. I'm just like, you guys have only been dating for 2 months, and it's been, 2 days since you've heard from her? I don't understand how that constitutes a while. But I don't know, maybe, I mean, different people are going to approach their relationships differently. That sounded a bit odd to me. If I were in the early stages of dating someone and hadn't heard from them in 3 days, that would not raise any alarm bells for me. But whatever.
Yeah.
But all of this is basically just to imply that he has picked up that something is going on, and in fact something is going on. Lorelai is edging her way towards breaking up with him. We get kind of a more clearer view of that in the next scene when Rory and Lorelai are clearing out the fridge, and Rory is talking about the gossip about Paris's parents' divorce. And I also kind of don't love Lorelai's parenting in this scene. Like, I don't want to overstate the case. It's just a small thing. But when Rory says that she feels bad for Paris, Lorelai's response is, "That's because you are the nicest kid ever to walk the earth." And my thought is, that's kind of overpraising Rory in this scene. Her response should be, good. It is good that you feel bad for her. We should feel bad for people when they go through something, even if we don't like them and even if they've been mean to us before. Like, yes.
Or even go further and say that may explain why she's such a difficult person, because she has this family dynamic that is crazy. There's a lot that they could have talked about in this scene. Maybe again they were running out of time. I don't know, but yeah, she doesn't. Well, and that's Lorelai all over the place. She's often flippant. She's flippant. She doesn't like to get into things deeply.
Yeah,
which is why she pushes back at Sookie when Sookie's trying to tell her she has a pattern. She's not very self-analytical until she is absolutely forced to be, and that does happen at the end of the episode.
And she also has a tendency to overpraise Rory.
No, she does that too.
What is happening in this scene is Rory is demonstrating basic empathy, and Lorelai literally responds by saying that makes her the nicest kid to ever walk the earth. And it's like, no, it just makes her nice. It just makes her nice. It just makes her good. It doesn't make her the greatest. It's a good thing, but it's not the greatest thing.
Well, and when you're talking about that, and I'm thinking, yeah, that is a very simplistic thing for her to say, to overly praise her. But I kind of sometimes wonder if I did not praise you and your brother enough that way. That everything, we were always so busy, life is so busy, that when you would do good things like that, I should have praised. When you said things like that, I should have praised you more. I think that that's not a bad thing to do, but she does it too often.
She does it too much, yeah.
She does it too much, yeah. But she also points out in this scene that Madeline and Louise, that the dynamic has changed there. They said hi to her. And they talk about the book. They're cleaning out the fridge.
That's when Rory picks up what Lorelai is putting down as well, and Rory picks up on the fact that she seems like she's about to break up with Max.
She's going to give the book back to him. She wants Rory to give the book back to him.
Which I also, like, that is also terrible. She claims that what she's trying to do is keep her love life out of Rory's life, but what she's literally doing is asking Rory to break up with Max for her.
Yep.
Like,
that's exactly what she's doing.
Maybe she hasn't thought it through, but, like, if Rory were to give Max that book back, how is he going to respond? He's going to respond by understanding that this is Lorelai breaking up with him while talking to Rory.
And one of the things Rory says to Lorelai here is, he shouldn't be asking you about me. Because he had been that day in school. And so, it's not right, is what she says.
And that's true, but you also should not be asking her to return the book for you.
Nope. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the thing that you didn't want was for her to be involved, and yet you're doing this? No.
What you're doing is way more inappropriate than him just asking whether or not you're going to go to Parents' Day.
So then we get to Parents' Day.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I like how Rory responds. I feel like Rory's response in this scene is,
again,
like, appropriate.
She's the parent here. She's the parent here. The roles have reversed, and she's the parent. She's much more mature about this whole thing than her mother is.
And she's correctly mad at Lorelai, both for her sudden decision to break up with Max for no reason, and for trying to put Rory in the middle of it. Then the next scene is at school, and just to make
it's a very difficult scene.
Yeah, to make Lorelai look better, we get a real good look at Paris's mom, who sucks.
What I wish we knew a little bit more about Paris's mother. This is the only time we see her. This is the only scene we see her, and she's basically telling her daughter, "I can't come to." She's there at school, but she doesn't want to go to even one class because you know how hard this is for me. I'm going through a divorce, and what she basically means is she's in this elite society. Everybody knows her. Everybody knows what's going on. That her husband has been having an affair and living with somebody else in Paris, which is where another part of the Paris is burning title. The mom is being left, and she doesn't want to face everybody who knows that. But she's there. She's in the school. Why doesn't she just go to the one class? Is it going to kill her? And she doesn't. She just won't do it. She says, no, it's too hard for me. What she can't see is her daughter. It's hard for her daughter, too. Paris is facing the same things that she's facing, only she's facing it every day with the kids at school who are the children of the parents who are gossiping about her mother. So they know what's going on. Everything that's happening to the mother here is happening 10 times worse to the daughter who can't not go to school. She has to face it every day. And all of that is obvious in this very short, maybe 15-second scene. And you just want to hit this woman. She is being a real bitch. And I don't use that word very often.
And she also, opens it by, insulting Paris's skin. She claims that Paris isn't using this special skin cleanser
for her
that she
acne.
got for her.
And Paris has beautiful skin.
Beautiful,
it's
flawless
gloriously
skin.
beautiful. Yeah.
She looks like an angel in this scene. And then we get this woman saying, "You clearly haven't been using the facial cleanser I got you." And it's just like, what?
Yeah.
She looks perfect. And even if she didn't, how dare you say something like that to your daughter in the middle of the school?
At school.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, gosh. So that sucks. We all feel very bad for Paris. And then we get the scene in Mr. Medina's class. And this is also, so the whole class, we get a little bit of him, talking to the parents. And then everyone files out, and he and Lorelai are finally left alone together, which is when we learn that he has left her 4 messages since Saturday. To be honest, I feel like they are both being very inappropriate, right from the jump in this scene. I think it's inappropriate that he tries to start this conversation with her. I think it's inappropriate that she thinks she's going to break up with
Parents' Day, at school.
At school, where, it's not even just at school. It's at school where all of the other parents are there. It's about as public as it can. I cannot imagine having this kind of a conversation at my workplace And especially if I worked with teenagers, and especially if it was the day where all of the parents were there.
And they're loud.
They're loud.
They're loud.
I don't know. I mean, different schools are going to have different schedules, but it's also very weird to me that he's both acting like he doesn't have another class coming up, and he's acting like there's no chance someone's going to walk into his unlocked classroom with glass doors leading into it.
Yep.
It's wild. And of course, because it's a TV show and we need things to be dramatic as possible, she tries to break up with him and fails, and they end up making out. And right as they're making out...
he grabs her and kisses her.
Yeah.
He forces a kiss on her, which is also another trope where the man shuts the woman up by kissing her, dynamically, strongly, grabs her, pulls her in, and then they keep kissing. It's a long kiss.
Yeah, they keep going.
And Paris sees them, and now she has ammunition to go take back out to her classmates to get the attention off of her.
Yep.
Oh, look, Rory's mom is having an affair with our teacher, and which is what she does. She goes into the cafeteria and starts just goes to the head of one table and the head of another table, and you could just see the rumor coming down the table. And I was thinking about Harry Potter, the visual of Harry Potter, at the private school and the table. The kids at the table just passing the information down the table, and it's a visually a very well done scene.
Yeah, and Rory can kind of see that something's happening, but she can't hear exactly what's happening until Paris comes over and throws it in her face that she just caught her mom making out with a teacher and told everyone. And Rory is humiliated and furious, and rightfully so.
Oh, one of her best scenes in the entire show.
Yeah.
In all 7 years, she finally stands up to Paris.
Yes.
And she tells her, "You're doing this to me, which is what, is being done to you. Do you really think that's the right way to go?"
Yeah.
And she shames her into feeling bad about it. And Paris must really be feeling vulnerable because she has never felt bad about anything she's done up to this point, but she sees the truth of what Rory says to her, that you should be ashamed of yourself, you shouldn't do this, you're doing to me what's being done to you. How does that make it better for either of us?
Well, and I think it's because of the way that Rory addresses it, because she doesn't say it in like a super aggressive way. She just basically says, "You were just experiencing this and then you turned it on to me. Why did you think that was the right thing to do when you were just feeling how it feels?" And she also points out, like, Mr. Medina is really nice to you. He holds up your work in front of class.
He respects you.
Yeah, he respects you. He lifts you up, and you turn around and
you've done this to him too. It's not just that you've done it to me and my mom. You've done it to a teacher who respects you. Because that what's going to happen here. He's a teacher, and everybody's going to find out about this. The parents are going to find out about it. They're going to complain to the hierarchy at the school. He's going to get in trouble. We know that's going to happen. As soon as we see her spreading the rumor, we know what's going to happen. And she does start to feel a little bit ashamed of herself.
Yeah.
And in that moment, her cold facade kind of breaks down. It's hard for her. She kind of struggles with it. She says, "Well, maybe we could talk." Rory offers to talk.
Yes.
If you ever need to talk, she can see that what Paris really needs is a friend.
Yeah.
And what she needs is a friend who is at her level. These two girls who are her quote-unquote groupies are really not at her level. They don't understand things as well as she does.
And they're not very empathetic to her.
They're not very, And this is she and Paris could really be friends. They are a lot alike. They're both very smart. They're both passionate, and they have very good at perceiving what's going on. Empathy, like you said, what's going on with other people. They have a lot in common, and they have been afraid of that man and Superman thing again. They've been afraid to acknowledge it until now, because there's also a competition there, and mostly on Paris's part. She's the competitive one, but Rory's been pushing back.
Yeah.
She's like, "Well, if you're going to be mean to me, I'm not going to be nice to you. Why would I?" But in this moment, her being mean to Paris is actually a form of being nice to her, because she's telling her what she did. Because probably nobody tells Paris, that she's wrong. So she does. She tells her, and Paris says, "Well, maybe we could talk. Maybe not, though. I have to think about it. Well, maybe we could. I don't know. Maybe." I mean, she goes back and forth.
She says, "We're not friends," and Rory's like, friends, "I know we're not friends, but I will still be there if you want to talk." And you can just see Paris be like, "Well, well, we're not friends, but maybe." Maybe.
Maybe, yeah. He's breaking down. She's letting her facade down and letting Rory see her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is not easy for her to do.
Yeah. She kind of has to couch it in this like semi-hostile language, but you can see some of the vulnerability coming through.
In that moment with the two of them breaking down their barriers with each other, I was very proud of both of them.
Yeah.
I remember I wrote in my notes, proud of both of them, because this is not easy to do, especially for young women.
Yeah.
At that point in life, it's really hard to be honest about how you feel. And they're both kind of being honest there, and it was just a really good moment. But anyway, I love that scene.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the one of maybe two positive developments of the episode. And I do think the Man and Superman thing is an apt pull there, because I do feel like, in a way, Rory and Paris's friendship plays out kind of like a rom-com, where they are like kind of hostile to each other, but then sort of against their own will, they end up kind of liking each other.
Drawn to each other. Yeah. They've been drawn to each other from day one.
Yeah.
So what is the next scene? Because I've got down that I love that scene.
We actually jumped past the dinner scene.
Oh, on the stairwell.
Yeah, so there was the stairwell scene first, and then Friday night dinner, and then the Rory and Paris scene. But yeah, so the stairwell scene is basically just Rory being mad at her mom, and Rory is correct. And then and then we have a Friday night dinner scene where Emily, of course, already knows what happened. Emily has heard all of the gossip, and
she sends Rory off to her room. She doesn't have a room, but she sends her out. Go upstairs. I have to talk to your mother.
Yep.
And she's going to take command of this. She's going to tell them what they need to do, because she's the expert and she's the mother, and they need to do what she tells them to do. And she doesn't realize how what her daughter is actually going through, which is that she really likes Max. She wants him in her life, and she starts to tear up when her mother's talking to her. She says, why are you doing this? She says, well, because I really like him. He's a really good person. And of course, in Emily's mind, nobody is good enough for her except Christopher. Even though there's a guy who's a teacher, and he's a teacher at Chilton, she still, and she doesn't realize until the scene is over and Lorelai gets up and walks away that Lorelai's really upset, that this is hard for her. And then she has just a quick moment of doubt comes across Emily's face.
I think also what's happening in this scene is basically because Lorelai is forced to defend this relationship, she kind of
has to think through it.
And kind of talks herself back into wanting to be in the relationship again. Like she kind of has to really think about the fact that she does like him, and despite all of her distancing for the rest of the episode, she can't deny that she likes him, which does eventually bring us to the end of the episode. Although before that,
we got the most important part of the whole episode is what happens next,
which is that Sookie gets her squash blossoms.
Which she does get her squash blossoms. Yes, she does. And what I love what Jackson says here is, hurrah, mediocrity wins again. So, because they've been fighting over this, he thought that he really wanted her to try his hybrid, whatever it was, his hybrid vegetable. By doing that, he is attacking her standard, blossom dish that she's been making for years that everybody loves. But he thinks it's mediocre. But while he's ranting at her, she is smiling at him, and her smile gets bigger. And I think she's realizing in that moment, obviously, that she's very attracted to him. And I was thinking at that moment, and I realized that the scene earlier with Lorelai is difficult, and she is being cruel to her when she said you haven't had a relationship in a long time. But saying that to her does open Sookie's mind. And so when she's listening to Jackson rant at her, she's smiling and realizing he's as passionate about food as I am. So then you want to take it from there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't disagree that, obviously the text of the episode is telling us that Lorelai saying this to Sookie caused her to have this revelation. I just think,
It's a tipping point for her.
Yeah, Sookie is able to cause Lorelai to have these kinds of realizations without saying cruel stuff to her.
Cruel things. Oh, absolutely.
If Lorelai was paying any frickin' attention, she would have noticed that Sookie and Jackson flirt all the time. The whole audience knows it. She could have just at some point said to her, hey, what do you think about Jackson?
Yeah, that would have been a much nicer way to handle it. Yeah, I know.
But that being said, I do like this scene, and I do also like that they don't, because I think the tendency in a lot of these kinds of stories is because Sookie is a plus size woman, the tendency is to say, well, because she's fat, that's why she can't have love or whatever. It could be, I think you could make the argument that that is the undercurrent of what's happening here, because why else
Absolutely.
would...
It absolutely is.
Yeah, why else would Sookie be, in any way afraid to ask anyone out? She's very pretty, she's very funny, she's an excellent chef, she's an accomplished person.
Mm-hmm.
But she is overweight, and we live in a culture where that's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
Mind you, Jackson is also overweight.
A little bit, yeah. But he's also a lot taller than her. You see that in this scene.
He's taller than her.
She is very short.
And culturally, we don't make as big a deal about men fat men versus fat women. Not to say that fat men don't experience any stigma. They definitely do, but it's worse for women.
It's worse for women, yeah.
And it's, there's this kind of idea that you can't be feminine if you're fat.
Yeah. Or that you can't be attractive.
Yeah.
And she is beautiful.
She's beautiful.
Sookie's just, Melissa McCarthy, again, let's point out that this is Melissa McCarthy, and she's young here. She's probably maybe 30-ish at this point, and she is beautiful.
Yeah.
And when she's looking at him as he's talking, and her smile is getting bigger, she is just so beautiful in that moment, and he's so busy ranting that he doesn't really notice that she's smiling at him. And then she says, would you like to have dinner sometime?
Yeah.
And he kind of stops in his tracks and says, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what she says at that point, but he walks off.
Yeah.
They don't make plans.
They don't make the actual plan.
They
never do.
He just walks off.
They
never do.
On
It just
TV
happens.
shows. Yeah, it's always just like, do you want to go out? Yes, end of scene.
End of scene. Yeah.
But I do like that the point of view of the show is not that Sookie is in any way undeserving of love. She is, and her relationship with Jackson is really cute, and I like that. I don't like how Lorelai treated her, but I like Sookie and Jackson.
It's good for overweight women, and I remember this when it was first on, thinking this is good for women who are overweight to see. And I don't use the F word, by the way. That F word.
I use it a lot because a lot of fat activists use it, and I do use it.
I think it's a harmful word, but okay, I understand that. But anyway, I think it was to see this beautiful woman who is overweight have a loving relationship with a man who is not all that attractive, but he's interesting and charismatic, and he gets her. They get each other, and to find happiness together. That was role modeling, and I think that was probably a very it was they were taking a risk.
Yeah,
it could have been rejected by the audience, but it wasn't, because they set it up perfectly.
Yeah, I think he's cute. I mean, he's not like necessarily going to be a model anytime soon. He's
not Luke.
He's
not Luke.
Well, nobody's Luke.
Nobody's Luke.
I mean, he's not like he's kind of an ordinary looking guy, but he's cute. He's got a thing.
I think he's cute because his personality is cute.
I mean, yeah.
He's got big ears and a big head. I mean, he's not when you look at him, he's not really that attractive, but he is attractive because his personality is sweet and funny and smart and passionate.
Yeah,
he's very passionate. They both have a passion for what they do, and that's what comes out the most. I think it's really good. I love the two of them, and I've been waiting for this episode. Been waiting. This is 11 episodes we've been waiting, because we know what happens, and we knew they were going to get together, and they're just adorable. And anyway, but the next scene is just the polar opposite of this one. It's very difficult. It's also very beautiful, but it's kind of redeeming for Lorelai, because she figures out that what everybody's been saying is right. That her daughter's been telling her that this is difficult. She's putting her in a difficult situation. She realizes that. She realizes that she has a pattern with men, and that she's afraid. It's not that she's afraid her daughter's going to get hurt, but she's afraid she's going to get hurt.
Yeah. And
she does say this to him, but then she also says, but I really like you, and I want to try and make this work. And then
he breaks
up with her.
Yep. Yeah, it's unfortunate. And he does say, like, the way that he says it, it's clearly not, he's not saying that he's not interested in her. He's just basically finally accepting that maybe it wasn't a great idea for them to go out in the first place.
Yeah, that he didn't think it through.
Yeah.
She tried to tell him early on, this we got to think about this. My
Mm-hmm.
daughter's life is, in the balance here. We really have to be careful and thoughtful about this if we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And he has pushed her beyond that again and again and again
Mm-hmm.
and gotten what he wanted until it bites him in the butt, which,
Mm-hmm.
if somebody sees him kissing her, they go to the headmaster. He's in trouble. They're even talking about possibly suspending him.
Yeah.
He's feeling it in a way that is just about him.
Yep.
It's all about him. So he breaks up with her, and
Yeah.
she says okay, and he leaves at the coffee shop. And by the way, they're in the same coffee shop that they were in on their first date, where they sat 3 or 4 seats apart. And she
Yes.
gradually kept getting closer to him. So she walks in, or she's sitting there, and he walks in, and they have this conversation. And he says, I had to think about this. I think we have to take a break.
Yeah.
And this is after she has poured her soul out to him and told him that she finally realizes that how she's been wrong and why, and she details it for him. I wasn't careful with my daughter, and I am afraid of being crushed. She says it.
Yeah.
I am afraid of being hurt, and yet I like you, and I'm willing to take the chance. And that's when he says, "Fuck you, I'm walking out." and
that's not literally what he says, but
he doesn't say that. No, but that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
It's like she's just opened her heart to you, and you do this to her.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he walks out, and so exactly, and this cannot be stated enough, exactly what she was afraid would happen happens.
Yeah.
So then she goes home, she's in bed, she's crying. Rory comes up and comforts her, puts her arms around her. This is Rory being them. She's been mothering her mother during this entire episode, and that's how we ended.
And yeah, that's the end of the episode. Any final thoughts?
Oh man, this was a good one and a tough one. Lorelai does a little bit of growing up in this one.
Yeah.
Rory does too, because she takes on Paris. She tells her, she's honest with her and doesn't let her push her around. So they both kind of grow up a little bit. I don't remember what happens with Max. I think they do get back together later on, but I don't remember, so I can't even spoil it for anybody. But Max is, to me, I would write him off at this point, because he's been a jerk all along. He has wanted what he wanted.
Yeah.
Pushing Lorelai into a relationship she wasn't sure about that might be inappropriate. Forcing Rory to think about what she should call him. And it's always about him.
Yeah.
It's always been about him and what he wants. And in the end, after she gives him this loving, sweet confession where she allows herself to be vulnerable and admits that she was afraid, that's when he does to her what she was afraid he would do to her.
Yep.
So I don't like him much at this point.
No, yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't like his behavior at all. Like I said, it is wild to me that he kissed her in the middle of a classroom. Like, that is just
To shut her up. To get her to realize that he was perfect for her. Yeah.
Yeah. And if I were Lorelai, I don't think I would have dated him in the first place, because I'm pretty sure at this point in time I'd already be married to Luke. So
yeah. That's really good. That's what she's got Luke staring her in the face.
I know.
Every day. He's gorgeous. He's interesting. He cares about her.
Very clearly into her.
Yeah, very clearly. And I think she's into him, too. I just think that she's got to work through some wild oats or something before she can give him a chance. And she has several boyfriends before they get together. And
she's not ready for commitment. And admittedly,
no, she's not.
Dating...
Luke is going to be the commitment.
So because she already knows Luke so well, it would immediately be a much more serious relationship. And she's not ready for that. So, okay.
And
fine.
as her daughter points out, you can't date Luke because then you'll break up with him and you won't be able to go back to the diner. She said that last episode.
Yeah,
so, and it's true. And she knows if she gets into it with Luke, she's got to take it seriously, be very thoughtful about it, and she's not ready to do that. Anyway, so that, dear listeners, is all for today.
Yes. I'm Tessa Dare. You can find me at my website, tessadare.com. That's TESSADAIR.com, where you can sign up for my email list, or you can follow me on Instagram at author.tess.adair or on TikTok at author.tess.adair. And if you want to support us on Patreon, that is patreon.com/whereyoulead.
And I am Beth Von Barron. You can follow me on Instagram at STL_writer_Beth, or sign up for my weekly Substack email, which I just started, Saturday Morning Musings, at STLWriterBeth, all run together, .substack.com. This has been Where You Lead, our fun and terribly witty podcast about the Gilmore Girls from the perspective of a mother and daughter. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll tune in for our next episode in 2 weeks. See you then.